Our next speaker is Professor Monder Ram. Monder is the Director of the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, better known as CREM, at Aston University, and one of the world's foremost researchers on ethnic minority entrepreneurship. So I think you're going to talk to us about why we should back the everyday economy.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Jane. There's no politics in my presentation, but hands up who remembers the prominent Tory politician Sajid Javid? Quite a few. Well, for me, one of his most memorable interventions in the policy discourse was when he congratulated the Labour politician Sadiq Khan on becoming Mayor of London. And he said, you wait ages for the son of a Muslim to become a high-ranking politician, and then suddenly two turn up at once. For the last 20, I know how he felt, because for the last 20, 30 years, I've been researching businesses that no one notices. They are the care homes, the nurseries, the corner shops, the retailers, the social enterprises, businesses that make up the everyday economy, businesses that are absolutely pivotal to everyday life, businesses that have been studiously ignored by the prevailing policy discourse. So you would think. Then lo and behold, what happened over the summer? Over the summer in July, we got the launch of the small business strategy, and it identified the everyday economy as one of its 5 key pillars. Virtually at the same time, from my patch, the West Midlands Combined Authority, in its wisdom, and I'm very proud of it, so also identified the everyday economy as central to its regional growth plan. So there you have it at a national and a regional level. There's belatedly recognition of the everyday economy. But what does that actually mean for the coffee shop owner, the care home manager, the retailer? How does that reflect his or her worldview? That's going to be the topic of my talk. Let me make this a little concrete. We recently finished a 4-year ESRC funded project on local caterers, on retailers, and on freelance entrepreneurs in the creative sector, and also Bangladeshi restaurant owners. And what was really interesting is one of the very early conversations I had with the Bangladeshi restaurant owners. We came in and spoke about productivity, as Steve mentioned, labour productivity, and they stopped us. They said, what do you mean by productivity? Well, they said, well, for us, it means keeping our suppliers and workers happy, keeping our customers happy, and surviving for another year. And it's that gap between how the owners understand productivity and our policy language that I want to talk about. And I'm going to draw on that project that we did, because this collaborative nature is very important to what we actually found. It's collaborative nature. So we worked with a range of different researchers, economists like Mark and Steve, ERC were part of it, and sociologists like myself, looking at the real-world experiences of the everyday economy. And so we did surveys, we did detailed interviews, we did ethnographic work. But really critical to the design was who we involved in the process. We didn't look at these firms in isolation. We looked at their ecosystem. Who did they naturally gravitate towards? So as part of our research design, we included 3 or 4 community-based intermediaries, who are the trust of these business owners, who invariably never engaged with the business support ecosystem. So what I want to do is draw out 2 or 3 key lessons, key takeaways from that research, which I think cast light on this morning's session, and particularly on the everyday economy. And the first lesson is the seriousness test. You can't be serious about productivity and inclusion if you treat the everyday economy as a sideshow. I've been an academic for a long time, and back in the 1990s when I sort of stood, not that long, in the 1990s, we heard conversations about priority sectors and firms at the frontier. No mention of the everyday economy and how important it was to back them, which I don't necessarily disagree with entirely, just a bit. And then fast forward to now, wherever we are now. And I still sit in meetings, and now it's AI clusters, knowledge zones. And the sort of never-ending search for unicorns or gazelles or what the contemporary creature is at the time. And then I look outside and I don't see these mythical creatures. What I'd see is a lot of micro businesses keeping the local economy going, providing jobs, and keeping communities together. And so my first interaction, I first rubbed up against productivity and what it actually meant and didn't mean when I was working in my own family's business, and it didn't come from an academic model. We had to keep customers happy every day. We survived on narrow margins, and we provided jobs for the local community. My book was called Managing Survive for a reason, because survival was our imperative, but so was not survival for us individually, but survival for us as a community. And the work that the ERC have done with Rita and Steve's recent report really bears that out. And Mark has sort of said that the dominant form of employer are the kinds of firms that Mark and I have sort of been talking about. That's the dominant form of employer. Yet, we know so little of them from formal statistics and formal surveys. I think Rita and Steve mentioned in their report that most management and innovation surveys inexplicably exclude micro businesses, and you've heard from Mark how important and central they have been to the economy, yet we don't include them at all. So knowledge is very poor, very scant. And I think in Rita and Steve's report, they say at the end, we need to understand the worldview of the micro business owner. We do. Us sociologists have been doing exactly that for 30 years. There's been a whole body of sociological work that highlights the centrality of the household, the importance of community, the importance of different jobs that have a direct bearing on what we mean by growth, what we mean by productivity, and what motivates business owners. This is mainstream stuff that affects the trajectory and growth of a firm, but we ignore it. So if we are going to treat the everyday economy seriously, we need to engage with those kind of debates, and we need to look again at the kinds of mechanisms that we use to generate evidence, because they're not fit for purpose if we're excluding the bulk of our economy. So that's the first test and the first key lesson. The second key test and lesson I want to sort of highlight is there's not a lack of ambition in the everyday economy and micro businesses. There's a lack of recognition. Micro businesses, the everyday economy, are busy adapting, changing to the exigencies of the world. They do that constantly. But they operate inside systems that don't recognize that adaptability, that agility, that very localized and quiet innovation. I've mentioned the survey instruments that don't recognize it. And this was really hit home to me in the project that I mentioned. Let's go back to the Bangladeshi caterers. What happened during the pandemic? Their market just evaporated overnight. It was an existential issue for them and many other firms, because these caterers couldn't just say, well, gravitate towards Uber or Deliveroo. I didn't realize at the time, but they took 30% commission from these firms who already were on the margins. But they didn't stand still. They adapted. We saw digital experimenters emerge during this time of crisis, adapting, changing, responding to the market, delivering a new offer, developing a new offer, really importantly, helping each other out at a time of crisis. Their own organic, totally invisible ecosystem emerged to sustain this sector. It wasn't the mainstream business support that sustained them at that time. And that is what we call sort of quiet innovation that's totally ignored in our worldview of how these firms actually operate. So why is that the case? Why do we ignore it? It's because what we count or don't count, what we assume, and what we offer. I mentioned, in terms of what we count, these firms didn't have formal R&D spend. They didn't have patents. They didn't have formal products in any sense. But that doesn't preclude them from being innovative. And that's the point. Why do we recognize one kind of set of products and artifacts as innovative, and a whole process that sustains a sector as something other? Because that's what we count. What we assume, what we see, what do we think about, what's our default perspective on what an innovative firm or a growth firm is. We've had this debate. Normally, it's the latest indulgence of a tech bro. It's not the kinds of businesses that we see in the everyday economy, and it's not the kind of inbuilt adaptability and agility. Mark's mentioned the 30-year track record of resilience, etc. If you're from a diverse background, resilience isn't an episodic. It's not something episodic you do now and again. It's central to your condition of survival for discrimination, etc., etc. So these are assets. These are assets. They're survival. The sociologists have done work in Rookery Road, in Birmingham, in Leicester, on 3 streets, and found those high street firms have been in operation for over 40 years, contributing to the local economy. So our assumptions need to change about scale up, but also about the contribution of the everyday economy. And also, what is the offer? What do we offer? Often it's sort of formal, top-down, formulaic, transactional business support, when the firms need the opposite, and that's why often there's a lack of engagement with these programs, because that it's not for me. And I think in relation to the question that Stuart posed, there's a body of literature within the, I think, minority business entrepreneurship literature that talks about discouragement. Firms being discouragement from financial and business support products because they think, well, it's just not for me. So that the recognition problem is there. That's the real problem. It's not one of a lack of ambition. So the third test I want to draw your attention to is not recognition, it's not seriousness, it's relationships. If we are serious about backing the everyday economy, we need to be serious about backing relationships. We need to back relationships with the individuals and the institutions that connect with the everyday economy. That is critical. This fundamentally boils down to two things: who you work with and how you work with them. And in our project, I mentioned we worked very closely with the community-based intermediaries who were absolutely central to our work with the businesses and a lot of positive outcomes we had with them. And what they had in common was that they understood the businesses, the challenges, the obstacles faced by the business owners. They could explain policy concepts, business support to the individuals, and really crucially, they were trusted by them. They would be there on the ground. And this was vital to their engagement, their enrolling of business supports into the wider business support system, but because this gets missed. That was crucial to them. And this is really important for the kind of businesses we work with, but it's not an isolated point. If you look at what the FSB and the National Enterprise Network have said, this is vital. This is a vital part of the relational infrastructure of local economies and local regions, as vital as the economic infrastructure. But what attention do we pay to investing in those relationships? So that's actually pivotal to what I'm saying, the relational element and how you work with them. I've been critical about product-driven offers in the business support space. It's really important to work with intermediaries as partners in the support, partners in the co-creation process of what an intervention, what an offer is. And that's exactly how we worked with them. So with our retailers, we worked with an organisation called Citizens UK, who weren't part of the formal ecosystem, but are recognised as such now, thanks to our combined authority. We brought them into this work because they emphasised the importance of relationships. We employed a community organiser, not a business advisor, and their job was to build relationships with businesses. With the music sector, the freelancers, we worked with a small social enterprise who had considerable heft and credibility with freelancers who wouldn't use mainstream business support. They were effectively a community hub for them. And with the Bangladeshi caterers, we worked with an informal network. So that's the key point. And I suppose the question I would ask is, the design question I would ask is, who are you working with to provide, locally, to provide support to the everyday economy? And are you giving them the time and the resources to stay in the game? Because it's so important to invest in long-term relationships. So as I draw my comments to a close, let me go back to the start when I said who gets noticed and who doesn't. We have a national plan now, which I very, very much welcome. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us here, really, to try and make it work and to try and make the implementation as inclusive as possible. But how would we evaluate the success of it? Well, maybe in 5 years' time, we invite some of the business owners that I've talked about, the restaurant owners, the care managers, retailers, bring them here, bring them around a timetable. What would we want them to say in 5 years' time? Well, I'd hazard 2 or 3 things. Policymakers understand our world. Business support is delivered through people we trust and respect. And we are now seen as partners in developing local prosperity, not as an afterthought. If after 5 years we can utter those 3 sentences, then this moment and this plan would have worked. If we can't, then no matter how elaborate our plans on paper, our documents, then productivity And we'll still be doing productivity and inclusion to them rather than with them. Thank you.
Okay. Questions for Monder? Craig.
Hi. You said that it's really welcome that the small business strategy recognises the everyday economy. But is the dichotomy here that policy that's recognised with what the measure of success looks like? I'll give you an example. In the emerging growth plan that you mentioned in the West Midlands, one of the measures of success is the number of jobs created above the median wage. That is simply not applicable to many businesses in the everyday economy. So the policymaker's measure of success does not apply to what you just articulated?
No, I agree. I welcome the attention to the everyday economy, but I think the metric, well, this is the wider point about all metrics. I mean, who devises them? They're not being devised in consultation with the individuals concerned. If there was, that wouldn't hold. You know, it's exactly the same point about the national living wage and how it's been introduced and who's involved in the consultation. So I'd agree there is a fundamental tension here. And I think overcoming that requires really, really close engagement with with people who know, with the intermediaries who know, who work alongside them. So I'd agree that it is a tension.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. Nathan Smith, Insights NASA's lead, Growth Lab, part of GC Insight. When I saw the title of your talk this morning, I was really excited because it's a debate that I've had with lots of places and also national government this year. You talked about some of the emerging policy pieces, which are good to see, but at the same time, in a lot of places, the narrative has shifted fully to focus on things like the modern industrial strategy and other topics, and with changes to funding, it now means that a lot of places won't get funding unless they focus on those sectors and those plans in their entirety. In some places, there is some really good support and there's a really good focus, but in other places, when we've brought up the conversation about the everyday economy, there's really not a good approach to it, and people really don't want to talk about it if it's not a really exciting sector that people think is often termed as sort of a sexy sector, something that's got the word tech on the end of it. I guess my question to you is, what would your advice be to anyone that's trying to help local places and government to try and shift some of that narrative? So not just the support, but actually the approach in terms of how these places and government talk about and champion the everyday economy. What would your advice be to move that narrative forward?
I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and part of the advice would be there is an evidence base. So there is an evidence base. We just haven't put it together that well. I mean, Mark's now mentioned the point about resilience. If we draw on other disciplines as well, I think we can put a compelling evidence base there to support the everyday economy. I think there's also the power of example. I mean, as I said, I'm from the West Midlands. One of the innovations that I strongly endorse that our combined authority have introduced recently as community hubs, partially, as I hope, on the basis of some of the recommendations we made. But the community hubs, it started as a pilot, it's now been extended. It's based in anchor institutions around all communities, got all types of businesses, and it acts as a stepping stone to the more sort of conventional kinds of business support. So I think just making the point consistently, I mean, the combined authority have listened and have integrated that into their offer. And I think making that point all the time, working with different agencies. And that's why I think evidence is important, and we've got the evidence base, but actually working with different people, different actors in the ecosystem to mobilize their resources, their positions in the ecosystem is really important. That's what we've done in the West Midlands. We worked alongside the combined authority. We worked alongside minority business networks and different kinds of agencies to bring these agencies together, share evidence, co-create an intervention. And we had the community hubs. It's a really promising start. But I think that's what we have to do. I don't think we can give up, because as I said, it's such a central to our economy, and I think the narrowness of the discourse is really, really worrying.
Ooh, don't know. Who was first? I saw you first, so.
Hi, Monder, how are you doing?
Hi, Alex.
Alex, Chairman for the National Enterprise Network. I'm passionate about the everyday economy and the organic nature in which we're embedding things. What I'm seeing at the moment, Monder, is that there's a significant number of other things coming on board which are sort of swaying against this. We've got the Get Britain Working campaign, we've got Connect to Work, we've got people being released from prison earlier who are now looking at self-employment options, but all of the funding and the opportunities which are being directed are not necessarily being focused on the everyday economy. I'm mindful we've got products, and those products aren't hitting the micro businesses. And I'm just looking at how we get a national perspective on this, because we've got very piecemeal bits of funding at the moment which won't necessarily let us address it nationally. And in combined authority areas, they're looking at it in very significant ways, but they are asking for outcomes. And I see this as something which is going to come quite more significant over the next year or so.
Yeah. Well, I agree with. I take that as an observation and a comment. I mean, I think it's a really, really massive issue that's confronting everyone in the business support arena. And it's been mentioned there that, you know, here are the issues that are emerging, but the funding isn't aligned with that. And the area where I think it's perhaps weakest is I don't think there's a value being put on the relationships that organisations like yours have cultivated over many years, and some of the networks that have been instrumental in bringing in these different groups into the business support system. Those require investment, and that they pay, but they're not invested in. But you talk about outcomes. I don't know how you get those outcomes if you don't invest in the relationships. You'll get transactional or piecemeal outcomes that tick boxes, but not make substantive change. So I think that is a worry.
And the constant shifting of funding just undermines all that stuff. I think we've got time for one more question. I'm going to, Colin, you had your hand up, so I'm sorry. Anybody else will need to save it for the break?
Just a related question, really. I think so Colin Bell from Felshaw previously worked in a mayoral environment forum pushing business cases through to try and get investment for things like the everyday economy. Also found getting political buy-in relatively easy, but actually when you're faced with, you know, getting a business case through that's compliant with green book, etc., and probably, you know, looking for some of the outcomes like productivity gains with job creation is really, really tricky because the competition for funding is so competitive at the moment. Just a comment really to, it would be useful to get your view on it, Monder, is that where I found the kind of framing around outcomes more effective was actually looking at social, health, education kind of outcomes at that local level. I think there's an interdependency, and that kind of whole system approach seemed to hold more kind of weight.
Exactly. I mean, we've been saying for a long time, okay, what's the measure of social value? Right, I mean, people equate social value with social enterprise. It's not. You know, the kind of firms that we work with, many firms in the everyday economy contribute huge social value. It's not recognised. It's recognised in the study of Suzanne Hall. I mentioned the sociologist to look at 3 streets around the country. I mean, she found that these businesses disproportionately employed from a group we call NEETs. So if you're a policymaker, why wouldn't you back this kind of firm? Because they're doing it. They spoke multiple languages for business reasons. They were hugely resilient, backing up what Mark said. And in rateable value, they contributed a lot more in some of these pristine shopping centres. But I don't see that anywhere in the policy discourse. I don't see that anywhere. But the social value is so huge. And I think there's a built-in difference between sophisticated businesses that know the funding system and then can sort of give a template of what social value constitutes. But the huge amount of small firms that really do, they're unofficial community hubs, they're places of people get together because they're isolated from communities. They find different ways of navigating the local system. They provide employment of different kinds, flexibility. and they provide a stepping stone for so many. That's huge social value. That is kind of the value that the state, that's a role that the state used to do many years ago. But we don't acknowledge that. I'm not seeing that sort of given the kudos and attention it deserves. But then, you know, in terms of tendering processes, these firms will never stand a chance because they can't put that in a codified way.
Thanks, Monder.
Cheers.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
So,